Greetings programs and welcome to this tutorial on how to make a tilt brush scene in BlinkAR. So first off, we're going to be using Unity, and you must install Unity version 2019.3.15 F1. Now I'm going to show you Unity Hub here and show you how this works. So this is the installs I have. I'm running this for a separate project of my own, but for all Blink work, this is the version you must install. You can get it from the Unity archive website. You should also install the output modules that you need in order to output your specific platform that you desire. If you want only output to Android, do Android. If you want output to iOS, do iOS, but you can only do that from a Mac computer. If you don't have a Mac, then you can't output to iOS. Please talk to Apple about that. That's nothing to do with us. That's just their decision. So install these two first, or whichever one you can. If you're on a Mac, you can output to Android. So you can do both on a Mac, but you cannot do both on a Windows machine. I'd apologize if it was my fault. It's not. It's just what they decided. So once you've got the appropriate modules installed, then over here in Unity, you need to make sure that your build settings are set to the platform in question. And once you're set to that, you've switched to that platform, then you can do the rest of the scene. So that's the basic introduction and setup. So next we'll do the layout of the project. This is the project area of Unity, and I generally lay out projects like this. I'll have the title of the project itself, the entire concept, like it could be an art gallery, it could be a single client's projects, whatever. Then I'll have an assets folder that'll contain all the assets required to make the various scenes in that project. Then I'll have a scenes folder, and within the scenes folder I'll have a separate folder for every scene. This is quite important because when you export a Blink scene, you do so by exporting the folder, not the scene. You export the folder because you can export multiple scenes simultaneously if you choose to do so. Now, you can do so if you want, but you should be aware that every scene that you export in one export function exports every asset that comes with every scene. So if you have a bunch of assets, different assets in each scene, your final exported file is going to blow out to a pretty big file size. So I tend to have a separate folder for every scene. And also, I tend to name the folder the same as the scene. That's just a habit of mine. It also means that the output file contains the same name as the scene, which is a handy way to keep track of everything. And finally, I make sure that I never put any spaces in any of the scene names, or folder names for that matter. Spaces mess with various internet protocols, and it's just generally bad practice. So don't use spaces. Use underscores or capital letters if you need to have more than one word. But don't use spaces. Very, very bad. So this is the layout of the scene. It contains what we call the Blink system. It contains this container here, which within it there are several different child objects, a few lights, and an object that we call the yielder. We'll get into the yielder near the end. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete everything and rebuild it from scratch to show you exactly how it all works. Here we go. Everything's deleted. This is now a dead scene. Doesn't do anything. Now, the first thing we do is create a Blink system. So we create an empty game object, and we can rename it Blink System. So this is a good idea to rename things like that. Now, you'll notice that it did not appear at the world origin. It's offset by some random number. Well, some number anyway. You fix this by right-clicking on the word transform and selecting reset, and it resets all the transforms. So you can move this around, you can rotate it, you can scale it, and that's fine. All these random bad numbers, you don't want those numbers. You reset, bang, 0. Very handy little trick, that one. Now the reason we put the Blink system at the world 0 is because it's just easier to find. It's a good practice to do. But at the moment it's still empty, so we need to fill it with a component. So we add a component and we look for the word Blink and we add the Blink system. Now, you won't see the Blink system in your components unless you've got our project file loaded, which you can receive from us. We don't charge people for that. Anyone can have it, and that's how you build this stuff. So, this is the Blink system. This is the heart of BlinkAR and how you make AR work. Next, I'm not going to go into this till I finish the general layout of the scene. Next, I have a container object. Now, the container object, again, came in at a weird place, so let's just reset that. This object, I just call container, and it will contain all the things that we're going to have in AR. Now, if I wanted to, I could just drag this object into my scene and put it here, and then choose a tracking mode, let's say floor surfaces only and tables and stuff like that, and I'm technically done. This is a finished scene. I mean, it's still broken in some important ways, but the point is that technically that's a finished tilt brush scene. There are some problems though. You'll notice a lot of these brush strokes are black. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be like pink or blue or whatever. You'll notice that green cube is, well, I'll tell you about the green cube in a minute. And you'll notice also the content's offset. It's not in the middle of the world there, like it should be. I don't know. It should be over here somewhat. So this is where we get a little more interesting as far as Unity layouts are concerned. I make a container. Now, this container is like a root parent object. And inside the container, I tend to make a second empty game object, which I call the position, rotate, scale, offset. PRS offset. And then I put my object inside that. Now over here in Blink System, right now it's still detecting the actual object, the open brush object, as the target object. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put the container in there. Now what this means is I can come here to the offset and I can move things around, but the root here hasn't moved. It's still at the world origin. So all of my augmented reality will be offset correctly. And if I need to scale, I can scale the PRS offset and move it back here a bit more. And that way, what I haven't done is I haven't changed the scale of the root, and I also haven't changed the scale of this object. You may want to animate this object later on or do something else to it. If you do, then the scale becomes really important. So it's best if this thing not have any of its transforms changed. So you can affect them later on directly with a button or a script or something else later if you want to. That's a little more advanced though. So I do all my offsetting here, and that way I know that my root is at 0 and my content is at 0. So let's go to an isometric view from the top. Press the F key there to zoom in. And I'm going to position this with that in the middle. I'm also going to scale it a bit because I know that this cube is 1 meter. It's a 1 meter cube. So that means that my content is still a bit big. Let's make it about that big. Now let's look at it from the side. Okay, now the cube, the middle of the cube is at the ground, 0. So that means that my content is also going through the ground. I don't think that's good, so I'm going to raise it up a bit. There you go. So that's the 1 meter line, and that's roughly head height. Now 1.5 meters to 1.75. So people are looking generally down on the content. Let's bring it up just a little bit more. There you go. So now our content's in the right spot. Cool. So we've done the positioning and the scaling and the rotating. That's nice. Now next, we're going to go back to Blink System. I'm going to talk about the rest of the things in here. Okay, let me save this. Let's talk about this green cube first. The green cube is what's called the not visible bounding box. That's this guy here. Now, you can roll over the tooltip there, but what it says is, if the camera, that is the phone camera, cannot see any part of this box, then the content goes invisible. It literally vanishes. So what that means is, let's go to perspective mode here and zoom around a bit. Let's say I'm looking at the scene like this from the outside, and I move my phone so that I'm only seeing this part. Notice the green is off the screen now, that'll vanish. And that's really a jarring experience. You don't want that. So, it also means if I do this, the content will vanish. Also bad. So we want to make the cube larger than this. So what I like to do is again go to an isometric mode, view it from the top, and increase the radius of this cube. Now it's a bigger cube. So if I look at this content from any angle, I'll also be looking inside the cube, so I'll also see the content. It won't vanish unless I'm looking away from the content. However, looked at from the side, you'll notice that my cube is at the 0 there. The middle of the cube is at the ground, and the content's way up here. So if I go back to perspective mode and look up here, the cube's off screen, it'll vanish again. So we want to put the content in the cube, or we want to put the cube around the content. So there's two ways to do this. You can either increase the height a lot, like that, which is fine, but the cube goes down there, and maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want the cube to be right hugging around the content. So what you do then is you change the base from center to bottom. And that means that the cube now comes off the world 0. And then you just reduce the height a bit, and there you go. The cube now encompasses the content. So if you're looking for the content at any time, you'll also coincidentally be looking into the cube, or the cube will be visible, and so you'll see the content, it'll be on. It's a great way of saving a whole bunch of processing power and doing a few cool tricks with it too. You can use it for tricks, but we'll get into tricks is more advanced. So that's our not visible bounding box. Now you can offset the tracking location if you want with these positionals, if you want to. Oh, and there's the timer thing. I'll talk about that now. So when you go to make when the user calls up the scene, I should say, and they wave their phone around, at some point their phone will figure out where the ground is and they'll start tracking, and the augmented reality engine will kick in. This is a delay function. Do you want it to wait a few seconds before actually showing anything? I generally say no to that personally, so I put a 0 there myself. You can do whatever you like, but that's how I do it. Now, here we have specialized state transitioning. This transitions the state from not tracking to tracking the moment, this one here, the moment it gets tracking on the ground, it'll turn on tracking as a state, which means your content will probably appear instantly. This might be desired by you or it might not be. Depends how you want to do it. Personally, I don't use automatic tracking much. It's very good for experiences where the user has no idea what they're doing, and so you just make it work automatically, and it'll just work, and they won't have to press any buttons or anything. Tracking will happen, the content will appear, it'll just work. And that's great for demos and things. If you're doing something a little more interesting, a little more interactive, then you might want to turn this off and have a button that starts tracking, or a function or an animation or whatever, when it's time for tracking to begin. It just depends on how you want to make it work. So I'm going to leave it off for now. Reset when non-visible. Basically, it makes the object change state from placed to not placed if you go off the object. It's useful for some things. I generally don't use it much, so I'm going to turn this off. But you can experiment with these buttons and figure out how they work. They're pretty useful. I'm going to skip state-specific objects because it's rather complicated and requires a little more explanation, and head down to user controls. So user controls are how you allow the user to interact with your content. Do you want them to reposition it with their finger by sliding their finger across the screen? Do you want them to put 2 fingers on the screen and rotate or scale your content? If so, this is how you figure out what they're allowed to do and the degree to which they can do it. Enable positioning is just, can they put their finger on the screen and wiggle it and the stuff will move? Yes or no? And so you can say yes, no, whatever. I leave it on. People expect it. Rotate scalar simply means if I put my fingers on the screen and rotate those fingers, 2 fingers, for every degree of rotation, how many degrees does the content rotate around the axis of the object in the target, which is the container there, which is at world 0. So how many degrees will it rotate for every degree of finger twist? I've got 2. So it rotates at twice the speed of my fingers, which is pretty comfortable. You might want to change that if you don't like it. There's where you change it. Make it rotate faster or slower. That's up to you. Scale scaler is pretty much the same thing. Do you want the object to scale? If so, how fast? I generally leave it on 1. It's quite comfortable there, but you can make it scale faster or slower. If you scale it at 0, the scale function goes away. They can't scale anything. This is very useful for things like furniture demos. Furniture doesn't really scale. It comes in whatever size it comes in. So this is how you turn that off. So people can't scale anything. But if you want to turn it on, you might want to set a min and max. Because right now, even though it's on, the min max is all 1, so they can't scale it. Even though they can scale it, they can't scale it. So I generally go with 0.25 and 4. So they can go down to 1/4 of the size or up to 4 times the size. But again, set this however you like. You might want to make it colossally huge. Set it to 50 if you want them to scale it really big. It doesn't really bother anyone. It's just how it works. It's fine. Next is the user interface. So, the user interface is things that the user can interact with or be displayed to the user. So, these are marker-based switches. We're not using marker in this example. We're using markerless, as you can see up here. Markerless tracking mode is on, and marker is disabled because there's nothing in here. So since I haven't put anything in here, it's a markerless scene. So we don't need these 2 things because they're about markers. Do we want to display a relocate button? No, I don't like the relocate button. You may like it. Try it out. See if you like it. Personally, I think it's pretty much useless because we have a finger on the screen to drag function. Why would you need a relocate button? I'm leaving that off. Now, do you want the place button? The place button is very useful. This switches the state to tracking. It can be tricky because it forces the state to switch to tracking even when the phone's not ready for it. So you can experience unusual results if you allow people to have that button. But it can be useful. So I leave it on because I know what I'm doing. Sometimes people don't. Maybe you want to turn it off. If you turn it off though, and you don't have automatic tracking on, as in this function, if that's off, then the content might never appear because the content's waiting for a reason to appear. Since automatic tracking's off, it's waiting for a reason, and that reason is the display place button, the place button. So yeah, I leave it on for that reason. You can have subtitle files if you want. You can have a splash screen if you want, because this is a white label app, so splash screen all day long. And waypoints are a great way to do guides for people, so they can find your content in a large AR space. It's a much more advanced topic though, so we'll get into that later. Next, we'll go to the final section here, which is state-specific objects. This is really powerful stuff. State-specific objects allow you to select an object, like in this case, everything inside here, and tell it when it will display. So you want it to display when tracking occurs, so you turn that on. I like using this, not placed. What this does is when the AR scene has tracking, but the place button hasn't been pressed yet, the content will be visible if this is turned on. The content will be visible, but it won't lock onto any one location on the floor. It'll slide around the floor, locked to the phone screen a bit, locked to the phone. So this is a great way to allow people to locate things where they want to locate them. So you can use your tilt brush content as a location guide for your tilt brush content. It's a very smooth user experience. So this is a cool trick to get people to see the content before it's tracking, place it where they want to place it, and then press the tracking button or the start button, and now they can interact with it in the right way. Now we're going to make a second element here, and into here we're going to drag an object that doesn't exist yet. I've got to make the object. This is called the yielder. So we reset the transform, rename it to yielder, and put it in here. Now the yielder does a thing I don't fully understand and am unable to currently explain to you, but you want one, so put it in. You also want it on tracking, not placed, but you want renderers only. Renderers only means the renderers turn on and off when it's in this state and not the function. It's useful for some reason that I cannot fully explain. Just do it. It's what you need to do. But unfortunately, the yielder itself has no functions yet, so let's give it some functions. Yield of disabled renderer. This is why you build the yielder. It has to have this little script on it. If this game object renderer is disabled, the media player will not play. This is about the media player. Now, the media player is something you'll get into later if you do some video work, but it's also useful for other things. So, we're also going to add a mesh renderer to this, and that's the yielder finished. That yielder is populated properly, and now back in Blink System, over here, the yielder is set up properly to have renderers only turn on when it's tracking. So, this scene is technically finished, but not aesthetically, because as you can tell, some of the brushes are still black. So let's add some lights to turn the brushes on. Light. Directional. Boop. So this has turned on some of those brushes, but not all of them. See, those ones are still black because the light's pointing the wrong way. So what I do is I make 3 lights, and I rotate 2 of them a bit like this to light up other brushes. And then I turn 2 of them down. This is why I don't use a point light for this. I use these, because you can actually turn some of them down and up and create sort of a 3D-ish effect where your brushes change color based on where they are, if they're rotated. And I'll demonstrate that by rotating the container. You should see these brushes get brighter and darker. Yeah, cool. So, yeah, that is the end of setting up a scene. Quick note about lights: no shadows. You don't want shadows. Shadows bad. Shadows will make your phone slow down, and because there's a lot of content in a tilt brush scene, it grinds the phone. You don't want shadows. Don't use them. You can use a placement guide. It's a little circle that appears on the ground or on the surfaces when it starts tracking to show people where it's going to be placed. But the trick I did over here with the container showing when it's not placed means you don't need a placement guide, because the placement guide helps people find out where to place things. If the content's visible before it's placed, then this does that job. So yeah, this is a great way to get around that, and it's a really cool user experience. So finally, we're going to get on to actually exporting. It's really simple. If you've done all the setup, as I mentioned in Hub, you've got the right, you've done all this in the right Unity version. See, it's 2019.3.15, and you've got your modules set up, how you need to set them up. What you do is you go to the folder above your scene, not the scene itself, but the folder above the scene. You right-click, and you go to Bundle a Folder, and choose the platform that you have on this machine. I only have Android on this machine, so I could only choose Android, even though these are there. That's just code. They won't work properly. So I couldn't really select them. It'll just create errors. If I was to right-click on the scene and try this, you'll notice these are grey, and I cannot click on them. So you must use the folder above the scene. And then I choose Android, and it will start to build the scene. This will take a few minutes, so I'm going to pop ahead to when the export is complete. When you export your Blink scene, you might notice that it builds shaders like this. This is perfectly normal. It's just the way Unity works, and I wish we could get around it, but it just takes time sometimes. If you've got a faster computer than mine, it'll take a lot less time. I'm running on a Surface Pro 5, so yeah, it takes a while. Okay, so it's in the last stage of building now. It's just compressing the final product, and bingo, exported. Now here's a good practice I like to do. At the end of every file name, I put an underscore and the name of the platform it's going to. This helps me differentiate it from the iOS build or any other version that you might do in the future. So then you take it to where you want to save it to, and that's the end. You're done. Now, if you have the sort of subscription with Blinxel where we are hosting for you, then you send me the BlinkDAT file. If you have the sort of subscription where you're doing your own hosting, then you upload the BlinkDAT file to your host, and you get the URL from your host, and you send that to me. And that's the end. I put it in the CMS, and you've got a working scene. So, thanks everybody. I hope that was clear. If there weren't, please jump on the Discord and ask me any questions you have. I'm happy to answer. I'm around all the time. Cool. Thanks. Good luck, everybody.